start by just getting, some of you know us, some of you don't know us very well, so I'll introduce ourselves a little bit. And this is our family here, snippet of our family. Kaylee and Aiden are home. Where are they? I don't know where they're at.
She had homework. So
Okay, they're home. So Kaylee and Aiden are home, and that's our dog Hunter.
Sorry.
But Kenzie and I have known each other for 15 years, and we've been married for 14 years. So when we got to know each other, we knew, hey, I like her, and apparently she liked me. So we got married real quick, and we've been doing ministry really ever since. And literally a month after I married her, I made the bold and maybe even dumb move of telling her that I thought God was calling us to move to Turkey. So we moved to Turkey.
And I said, well, I've always wanted to teach abroad, so.
Yep. So we moved about 8 months after we got married to Turkey. Spent some time there with the intention of, we had jobs, we found jobs there, but with really the intention of doing ministry there, doing missions there. And when we moved back, I went to work for my father. He owns a machine shop, so I was a machinist for several years. Kenzie went back to grad school, and we've just been on that path, and we got really involved with our church there. We were living in Mount Pleasant. We got really involved with our church there within the first few years, and they had invited me to join their staff. So I started part-time for a year, and then after a little under a year there, they invited me to come full-time, and I had various roles there, but my first kind of primary role was to start a college ministry there, and started a young adult, an assimilation ministry. I was on their teaching team, did a lot of different things, men's ministry, marriage ministry. Kenzie was on staff there for a year or two. She's worked for National Marriage Ministry, doing social media and some of the stuff for them. And so we've really been on this mission together for quite some time. We moved to the area about 3 years ago. And both of us went kind of full in to finish school. I had started seminary, she had started her doctorate, and we moved here to kind of expedite that process. So this past summer, both of us finished. I finished with my Master's in Divinity, and she finished with her doctorate. She got her doctorate in Educational Leadership and Special Education. And so, so we're excited. Our kids are probably even more excited that school's done for us. But again, the journey has just begun as we get excited about starting this church plant together and with hopefully many of you. So here's the thing, is some of you may have been here that day, but I gave a message 2 weeks ago called Why Plant New Churches? And so if there's a bigger kind of philosophical question of why in the world would we even do this to begin with, I'm not going to answer that question today. I'm just going to steer you to the Bridge website. And go watch that. If you're Facebook friends, I think it's on my profile somewhere. But go watch that, because that's the bigger question. That's the bigger answer of why do we do this in the first place. And it addresses some of those questions like, how do you connect with the people around you, and what happens when you get too big. And so we certainly have that in there. But we're not going to spend time there today. Where I want to start is Mitch, how in the world did you come up with this, or where did this come from? And this is what I'd say, years of just living it out a little bit, years of reading and learning and experimentation, but it's also in the last several months just making sure I'm really entrenching in the community that I believe that God's calling us to connect with. And so some of that is just connecting with a lot of other pastors and church planners around here. Some of it is really just the informal conversations we have with the people around us. Mackenzie is really involved in Portage Public Schools. That's where she works. I've been really connected with Portage Sports. I've been coaching a little bit around here and connecting with parents and other coaches that way. And just even some of the things we've been trying to do, some of you may be familiar with them, but these things we're calling hangouts. We're just trying to get a lot of people together and create conversation, create relationships. But one of the things we did recently was at a local brewery of a couple that's on this team, actually, at their brewery that they started less than a year ago, we gave out these surveys, and we offered them either a beer or tater tots or ice cream if they'd fill them out for us. And so the low C's and Kenzie and I kind of split the cost on that, but we went out and basically we were trying to figure out what do they value the most, and then also what has their experience been with the church or with Christianity. And so one of the things that we've found in that is there's some things that generally that people inside and outside of the church seem to value pretty unanimously. And so the first one, honestly, I don't think it's a big surprise to you guys, is just deep friendships. So that's building new friendships, or just deepening the friendships you already have. And we're going to talk about some of the barriers to friendship, but I think maybe you guys have even experienced this. It seems like it's harder and harder, not only as our culture shifts a little bit, but the older you get, to really develop deep and meaningful friendships. But it was certainly a craving of a lot of the people we've connected with. The other is just fun and entertainment. People are super busy, and so when they say, I want to give my time to this, a lot of this is just fun stuff, entertainment, whether it's a concert or going out with friends or something like that.
The reality is we have to hit that top 10 list. Like if we're going to do something that we want people who are unchurched or maybe haven't ever had experience with church people to come to, it's going to have to make their top 10 list.
Yep.
It's going to have to be something that is engaging and fun.
Another one is just this idea of like personal development or reaching one's potential. So if you're part of a church, that doesn't seem surprising, right? The big call is, the churchy word is sanctification, becoming more like Jesus to become the best version of ourselves. But this is actually, honestly, a common desire of all people. You talk to people inside and outside the church, they genuinely want to become better. They want to be a better version of themselves. They want to advance in their careers. They want to be kinder. They want to be more loving. They want to serve people. This is really a common desire. And I mentioned the last one here, and that's this idea of serving others. One of the feedbacks we got from people was, I wish churches would spend less time taking care of themselves and taking care of people who need it, right? And I think that's true in a lot of ways. I think sometimes that's an unfair assessment, right? Because I do believe that that's at least a desire or hope of a lot of churches.
Well, and sometimes we think, churches are actually really good at going and serving people. And I think for the most part, yeah, most churches are. But the part that I think sometimes we miss out on is actually serving alongside other people that are not from our church. So inviting people in to serve with us, or making sure that we're doing it with an organization that does it better than we ever could. So I think we kind of miss the mark on actually bringing people together and serving, and instead just go and do it just with the people right around us.
All right, so that's kind of what people like. So what are keeping people from entering or engaging relationships with the church or with church people? Because the goal of this, I just want to put it out there, the goal of this church plant is not to go cherry pick from all the other churches. That is not our goal, right? Inevitably, some people will come from, many of you are from other churches. You're from the Bridge, right? So there is an element of that's important to get going, but the goal would not be that we're pulling from other churches intentionally, but that we're reaching people who don't have a relationship with the church or with Christ at all. And so how do we connect with those people? We have to look at what do they value, and then what are the big barriers that keep them from coming into the church. And really from all those areas, I think we've landed on two big ones that just come up time and time again. And that first one is just religious skepticism. People have a hard time with the church, with Christians. And I would say probably even more so because it's the dominant religion in this culture, right? So in the same way, when we lived in Turkey, people were really, because it was a more secularized country, city where we were at, people give a very unfair assessment of Islam there. It was the dominant cultural religion, right? So they're just kind of angry at it. I would say that's kind of true here for Christianity as well. And so that could be because they had a really bad experience with the church. It could be because they don't agree intellectually with what the church professes. But there's a lot of reasons that people stay away from the church because they just don't buy into it completely. They've been hurt or they've been burned by it.
And sometimes it's not just the church. It could just be one or two people that they've interacted with at some point in their life. I know for me, I grew up in this area, and it wasn't the church in general. It was just a few friends that said one thing and did another. And I looked at that and I said, oh, that's what, God is all about, or your God is all about. I don't want that, because I don't do that. I don't say one thing and do another.
Yeah.
And so it might not be an organizational hurt. It might just be like they've been completely turned off to everything because of one or two interactions, or maybe it's multiple, and maybe it's really a deep wound that the church has caused.
So that's one of the areas we really hope to lean into. And we first and foremost, you have to build relationships with people, even to learn that they're skeptical about religion, right, or about Christianity. And then you have to get to know them well enough to be able to appropriately respond to whatever's going on in their heart and what they're reacting to. And so a lot of what you'll see is us trying to build a relational bridge first and foremost to try to help people see, hopefully, not to say that Christianity or the church is off the hook, but hopefully see some of the good things involved, and that's why we're about this. And so that's one of the big ones, religious skepticism. Another one, and I would say arguably the bigger barrier, is time, and you mentioned it already. We've given these cards out every time, and at least half of the people in there, that's their fear and anxiety, is overcommitment, burnout, all these things. If we're saying church people, for church people, the barrier to the church is time. Can you imagine an unchurched person, how big of a barrier that would be?
And we can't argue with someone who doesn't have the same priorities or beliefs. We can't argue with them and say, well, you should be putting this first. That's just it's not even logical.
Right.
So instead, we have to address this idea of time from the standpoint of, okay, well, how can we fit into, their priorities and their top 10?
Yeah, so that's where that fun and you'll hear that. But one's interesting, I was having a conversation with a woman, younger woman, probably late 20s, I'm guessing, probably a month or two ago. And just kind of asking, she's had a really bad experience with the church in general and has not been a part of the church since she was young. And so I was just kind of asking questions about that. And I was trying to get her to think openly and say, don't even think about the church. Like, do you have just spiritual desires? Do you have spiritual inclinations? Is that something you want? And we were going down this conversation, and she said, I'm sure there's a church around here that I would feel okay at or welcome at. That's not the thing. She said, if I'm really honest, when I wake up in the morning on a Sunday, if there were 10 things that I could do, church wouldn't even make the top 10. And this is what this is getting at, is time, right? Priorities. And so we're saying if we want to connect with these folks in a meaningful way, in a significant way, we can't just say, you prioritize your time wrong, be better, right? That's just never going to work. So we have to say, how do we overcome this time barrier, not just for people who don't go to church or aren't part of a church, but how do we do it for you all who want to be a part of this too? And I think we have some ideas how to do that. So to do that, we're going to talk about some values. But first, this is a disclaimer slide. We are not talking about principles. Principles are beliefs that define reality. These are, in my mind, the unchangeable truths that exist. And so Bible is authoritative, Spirit's active role, Father, Son, Spirit, the Trinity. These are things that I say are principles of this church. This is true. I don't get to decide whether those are not part of it. Those are a part of this church. What we're going to talk about is values. So these are kind of these qualities that shape our behaviors.
And these are just examples.
These are examples. These are great values. But now I'm going to share with you, we're going to share 3 of the values that we think are driving the trajectory of this church. And not just the only values, but we think these are the ones that have been most important to us over years of doing ministry together. And probably if we really investigate, they were there even before we knew each other. In the way we interacted with people in our faith.
Yep. And these 3 values, you'll notice as we put them up and Mitch starts explaining them, we've been very intentional to use words that are really palatable for anyone. Someone who is way outside of the church, hasn't even given it a thought, and someone who's in the church. So we really know that that's something that we need to do to make sure people, don't feel weird walking in or weird when we're talking about these things, is make sure we're using language that makes sense to everyone.
So the first one that's really, really important to us is this idea of inclusiveness, inclusion. And I put a definition here just so I'm really clear what I am talking about. And this is the idea of radically welcoming and knowing a person until they're ready to embark on their faith journey with trusted friends. It's making them integral to the life of this community, not just optional. And so I think one of the realities for people that are outside of the church is when they think about the church, they think, I can't even walk into that because I'm anticipating judgment. Or I can't even walk into that because I'm anticipating this list of things that I have to do or know to be able to fit in. And we're saying, no, we don't want that. We want people to feel like they can walk in from anywhere, any walk of life, and feel radically included and welcome, to the point that they're not just kind of this wallflower that sits on the side, but they're included to such a level that they're integral, that when they're not there, people miss them. People see their value. People see them as an important link or an important piece of the puzzle in this greater community. And so we're going to talk about how we do this. This is one of my favorite verses, quite frankly, when the Pharisees are coming after Jesus, and he says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And us as a community recognizing we're all broken people, and we want to invite fellow broken people into our lives to experience the same kind of transformation and healing and growth that we ourselves look for and desire. This idea of inclusion, you'll see, is even how we structure some of the things we're going to do, knowing that probably, and we haven't talked about this yet, but probably for most people, church, Sunday worship, whatever you want to call it, is not going to be their first step. If we're saying we want to grab people who've never been a part of the church, or maybe were and were hurt by the church, the first step is probably not going to be Sunday. And so where are we going to invite them into? Where are we going to include them into where they feel, quite frankly, welcome, safe, and a place where they can build a relationship with friends? Because until they do that, until they trust you, honestly, and you guys have probably all experienced this in your own lives, you could care less what they have to say. And so we want to create a space, an atmosphere where friendships can be built. And so we can talk about some of these biblical truths. We can talk about some of these hard points in our own lives with trusted friends. The second value here is this idea of engaging people, intentionally learning about a person's passions, pains, and purpose. By engaging their stories, we hear where the gospel can and will reach into their lives. So again, a part of our culture right now is we're getting progressively more and more isolated. We're busy, and we're getting probably more disengaged through technology too. And so one of the things that has to be really, really important to who we are, and it's part of this inclusion piece, it's really an extension, is saying how can we actively engage and get to know people, get to know their stories. We have a hard enough time really getting to know each other's stories just in the church community, to really know what makes them tick, what makes them hurt, what are they going through. And until we can actually figure those things out with the people outside of the church, we have no way of even knowing how the gospel even matters to them. And we have to know that. We have to know that. Otherwise, the gospel is no more significant to them than it was to begin with. And so we want to make sure we're engaging people in and outside of the church all the time. And that happens through these friendships, through radical inclusion.
And I think this is one of the things that I know that we're extremely passionate about. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that I mean, we both have experienced this within the church too, is that even if someone knows that you have a solid faith, sometimes people don't actually want to get to know you or don't feel comfortable asking questions about you. So you're no one on the shallow level. And it really is disengaging. Like you feel like they don't really know me, they don't understand me. And so if we are feeling that inside the church walls even, like think about the assumptions that we're making of people outside of the church walls. And so by engaging people and really, really, truly wanting to know them and wanting to know their stories, it's going to make us, honestly, grow in our own faith, because we're going to have conversations and have to dig in deeper. And it's not about manipulating it so that they come to know the gospel, but it's about truly knowing the heart of a person and knowing how to be a friend to them. And so really taking time to do that with people outside of our own faith.
Yep. Last one we're going to talk about is this idea of transformation. All of this is the church word for, or the non-church word for discipleship, really. It's becoming more like Christ. It's becoming the best version of itself. It's becoming the person that Jesus called us to be, ultimately. And so all of this, what you're going to see, this whole model, everything about it is built on our ability, ourselves, to be transformed by God, the gospel, by Scripture, by Jesus Christ. But it's also by our ability to help others become transformed through those same means. And so the launch season really is about us going through that together, learning, growing, being developed in such a way that we can help lead our friends, to people we're connected with, to that same transformative growth. But here's the thing is, we understand that because relationships take time, that this transformation, we obviously hope people experience life-changing transformation sooner than later, but we also embrace that for many, us included, it takes a long time. And so we are very openly saying we embrace the long game. And I would much rather people take this in at their own speed, at their own pace, than us push it too hard and they get burned by the church and say, screw you guys, this is exactly what I expected. Right? Because until they really trust you, until they really trust what you have to say in the heart behind it, they have no interest in becoming that person. And we know it too. How many times has somebody called you out for something that you know isn't good, right? And if you had a great relationship with them, you're like, all right, I hate that you said that, but I'll listen. And if you don't know them at all, and this is where sometimes it can happen right from the pulpit, right? If you don't know that pastor, if you're new to the church and you hear that said, you're just like, you know what? Nope, I'm done. I don't want anything to do with that. So this idea of transformation is us becoming the person God is calling us to be and helping others be led into. And everything about this church is built on our ability, just like you heard Ryan talk about today, is built on our ability to be disciples and make disciples. It's no different. This is really an extension from this greater mission we see in Matthew 28, but the mission of the bridge is they send us out. So this is where we get into kind of the draft vision here, and I say draft because this will be something we work on as a launch team. But this idea of being a close community, the importance of relationships, family, that deeper connection, learners and doers. This is, again, another way of saying disciple, but I don't really like that word because it's great for us if you're part of the church. It sounds weird if you're not a part of the church. And I like the idea of learners and doers because at the end of the day, it emphasizes both. Some people, their biggest fault as it goes to their faith is because they don't actually learn. And I'm talking about people inside and outside of the church. Sometimes people unfairly critique Christianity and they've never actually done any investigative work on it, right? Sometimes Christians will go and make these sweeping judgments, but they've never, ever actually learned it for themselves. So learning does need to be a big part of it. Here's the other thing is a lot of Christians have been in the church a long time and they've learned a lot, but they don't do a lot of it. And so by emphasizing both, we're saying we're going to be a community that learns and does. And we're going to back up what we say, who seek to include, engage, and transform every person to be like Jesus Christ. And so that gets into that transformation and the model of Jesus Christ as our leader. So.
Okay. So everything that we've talked about so far is built into what you're going to see for the model. So this model that we're going to show you addresses kind of the overall structure of what we're thinking God has called us to, but it doesn't address a lot of things. It doesn't address kids ministry. It doesn't address worship. It doesn't address all these, or worship team. But all these little nuances, that's something that being part of the launch team is going to be developed together. And it's going to be developed through time. So just know that going into this, that this is like that 30,000 foot view of what we are going to be doing.
Yeah, this is the dream, the perfected, right? If it could be perfect, which is not going to be perfect. But if it could be, this is what it looked like. And it starts with these big circles that we're calling crowds. And what these are, 30 to 50 people. They're hyper-inclusive. They're super appealing to people. They happen 1, 2, 3, 4 times a month. And they're places where people can establish friendships and trust. This isn't church.
Yep.
This isn't church. These are things that everybody inside and outside of the church would want to do. And so often we can say when we start building a church, I just came across this quote the other day. They said, if we build churches, we won't always make disciples. But if we make disciples, we'll always make churches. And this idea that we want to start out here and just make disciples. We want to start out here and really develop friendships with people. We want to start out here and really get to know them. Well, how do we do that if they won't come to anything because they're too busy and they're super paranoid about what a Christian might do or say to them, right? Well, we have to create spaces that are safe, that are fun, that are inclusive, and meaningful. And so we tried doing that a few different ways. And so actually this Friday, a bunch of us are meeting at Hopcat, and we're having dinner, and we're having my birthday is next weekend, and so another person on the team, her birthday is actually the same day as mine, and we're doing, you know what, we're going to have a birthday party. We're going to go out, we're going to Hopcat, we're going to have dinner, we're going to hang out, and for those who want to stay, we're going to go wander around downtown and find something fun to do. This is something that's appealing to me. Well, I know it is because I planned it, so I wouldn't plan anything that I wouldn't want to do. But it's appealing to me, but I believe that's appealing to all people, inside or outside of the church.
So these are meant to, one, not necessarily be a church event. Like,
Right.
That's not how we want
It
to
shouldn't
advertise
smell like
it.
the church.
No, definitely not. And it needs to be something that's attractive. So in these groups, these are not all Christians. Like, these are not all church people.
Ideally, they're not.
They better not be. But instead, what it is, it's an opportunity for anybody who's part of this church to say, okay, who is someone that I could invite in that I know doesn't have like a community or a church home or has been really burnt by the church, that I can bring along, and it kind of feels like that high school or college mentality where you're like, hey Sherry, I know you don't know this person, but one of my friends who knows this friend is going to have people down to their lake to water ski this weekend. Why don't you bring all your kids and your husband, we'll grill out, just come with me. Like, you can invite even though that person doesn't know that person. And we've really gone away from that in this culture where it's like, if you don't know the person, you don't want to go. Well, we just need to embrace the fact that that's a churchy thing. Like, you can not know a person and invite someone to something fun and bring them along. So this is the intention of these groups, is to invite people who are outside of your Christian community and just bring them into a place where we're not going to have a talk or a speech. Instead, it's just a fun place to bring people in to get to know each other. So hopefully I'm using you as my example. Hopefully, when Sherry comes back the next time, she now knows me, and she knows Mitch, and she knows some other people. And all of a sudden, those weird Christians aren't so weird anymore because you've met more than one, and they're normal people. So that's a whole kind of point.
So the way this works, some of you may know, if you know me a little bit, I appreciate microbrews, and I like hanging out at the Presidential, where our good friends own, and I enjoy just getting to know the people there. I go have lunch there occasionally, and so I was there this week, and I was hanging out and talking to a guy, and we were just talking about whatever, life stuff for like an hour, and I just had a good connection. I just started asking him, we do the whole, where do you work, blah, 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 and he starts, I find out he's from Vicksburg, he lives in Vicksburg, and he grew up there, and so I'm like, man, I'm thinking about planning a church down there, tell me about what I should know, and just asking questions, right? And by the end, I thought we developed a pretty good rapport and friendship there, and we had names and stuff, and I'm like, I couldn't shake it out of my head that night, so I'm like, man, I'm just going to send him a quick message on Facebook and thank him for coming. I did, and then next day I couldn't shake it. I'm like, man, I really like that guy. I don't know what his experience is with the church or anything, but I like that guy, and I think he could bring a lot to the table. So I did a crazy thing and just invited him to join the lunch team. Said, hey, I don't know what your experiences are with the church. You may hate church or church people, but either way, your perspective is really important to us. And so I put that out there. I didn't hear from him for 2 days. I'm like, oh man, I just did it.
Yeah, you were kind of being a stalker.
Yeah, I was being a weirdo. I was being a weirdo. But here's the thing: is a couple days later, he sent me a message. He's like, so I was talking to Jake about this. Jake's part of this launch team. He owns the place. I've been really thinking about that. If I'm really honest, I haven't had much experience with the church, and the few experiences I have all been bad. It's like, but I am interested more in hearing about this, so I might do this. And that's the power of knowing other people. And all of a sudden, it's just not a one-off. You get to know people in that community, and these things, what they do is create an atmosphere, and they're frequent enough and small enough where you could start getting to know several people that hang around in these circles, these crowds. And then by 3, 4, 5, maybe 100 times down the road, they say, I still don't know if I like church or church people, but I like these ones, and so I might go check out their church. Or I might actually listen or value what they have to say. And so that's really the heart of these. And we have 3 here just because, 3 is a good number. But the idea is that there could be many of these, and we have 30 to 50, but quite frankly, it could be 15 It could be 65. I mean, that's a big number, don't get me wrong. But the idea is it's a space that you can welcome people in, that you can include them into. And if you're doing that with 10 or 15, if you're like, Mitch, I'm an introvert, the thought of 50 scares the heck out of me, then create those spaces in sizes of 10 to 15 where it feels really welcoming to invite people from in or outside of the church. And it doesn't always have to be like pure fun entertainment. The other thing we talked about is people really value serving. And so I see these as being the vehicles for service in our community. And so these people come around and they say, we all are really passionate about this one organization or this one way of serving. So we're gonna commit maybe this one time or for 6 months to serving this community, to these people. And people, I'm telling you, we've seen it time and time again where a lot of the people that have been connected to the ministries that we've been a part of, they've been connected through service because people want to help, they want to serve, they want to make a meaningful impact on the community around them.
Now here's a side step. So for those of you that are here, you might be saying to yourself, okay, well, so you're wanting us to plan these. Like that takes time. No. Here's our disclaimer, is that these are groups of people that you're coming along, you're inviting into something you're already doing. So guess what? Some of you will never ever help host one of these. But some of you are sitting there and you're like, ooh, like I could get into this, Mackenzie. Like I can already think of some things that I would want to invite a lot of people to. So these are things that we know that we're already doing, whether it's a birthday party or whether it's a New Year's Eve party or whether it's water skiing on the lake or whether it's, hey, we're going bowling or all of these different pockets. And you guys can start thinking of some maybe that you like to do. Those are what we want to invite people into. It's not something that's like falsely created out of thin air.
Right.
So that's one way that we'll protect time too, is that it's just a couple times a month and it's things that we want to do and are already doing.
So logistically, you're saying, how does it work, Mitch and Mackenzie? The way I envision it, again, this is just kind of a model. It's not going to be this every time, but 3 to 5 people in this crowd say, we're going to take responsibility to make things make sure things happen regularly. Doesn't mean they always plan those things. It just might be make sure. And we're going to make sure that these lines are probably a lot more blurry in reality, that this contingent of people that have been around us are invited, included every time. So people aren't left out on the fringes. And that's really their role. They're in a lot of ways just hosts, and they're making sure people are included. But in reality, there will be some of this going on. And there'll be some smaller ones, and there'll be a lot of cross-pollination. Yeah. That's okay. The biggest goal is that we create this space where people feel welcome, included, cared about, and regular connections are being made where relationships can grow.
So Mitch, tell them how are you going to find people to put in these groups?
So this is the whole timepiece. So the whole timepiece here is you're saying, all right, Mitch, now you're asking me to go to all these events, and you're maybe even plan them, go find new friends, invite them in here. This all sounds very time-consuming. And what we want to try to get you to understand is we don't want it to be. These circles are the things you're already doing, right? Matt talked about how he's worried about this community over here and this. Yes, engage that community, invite them into these spaces. Like we're going downtown this Friday, right? That's not far from where you guys are at. And it's not necessarily the people that what the community necessarily, this group of people in this geographical area that we're trying to reach. We're saying we're going to have a lot of these things happen all over, and who are the people right around you all the time, and how can you invite them in to one of these spaces? And now there will be obviously hurdles if we're talking about where do you actually do church and that sort of thing. But you're inviting these people in and going all in. And so if I ask any one of you, what are some of these circles you're already deeply involved in? You could probably give me, many of you, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe more. It'd be, for us, it's, our kids' parents that we've become friends with, right?
Through sports.
Yeah,
or even
well,
through
those
school.
are a whole nother one. School parents, sports parents, people she works with, people I coach with. There's just all these different circles, and people in our neighborhood. in reality, if we try to do all of those and connect with all these people all the time, we're probably not going to do a very good job at it. So part of this would be saying, what if we just leaned into one of those communities really hard for a season and said, I'm just going to really get to know these people and invite them into everything I do. And this is the other piece of that time barrier, is we often think time is a huge barrier, and it is, because we try to separate everything in our life very cleanly, right? We try to say, all right, this is the time I hang out with my church friends. This is the time I go work out. This is the time I do my Bible study. This is the time I go hang out with, work colleagues. That's fine. But while we do that, we create all these boundaries, and we create we actually have to have more time slots to fill them all in. And so the big question is, what if we broke down all those boundaries? What if we just started inviting everybody into everything we did all the time? And some of you have already freaking out. You're like, Mitch.
What are my church friends going to say to my friends from work?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of conversations are they going to have? Guess what? They're big people. They'll have conversations. You don't have to facilitate it.
But it's just liberating, because all of a sudden you're like, well, I was going to have a barbecue this day anyways, and I wanted to invite some of my church friends over, but why wouldn't I invite my work friends over? Why wouldn't I invite my neighbors? And all of a sudden you're not planning 3 different events where you're trying to connect with different people at different times. You're just saying, why don't y'all come over and hang out? And then you start creating, in a way, these crowds, and they're coming from these different circles in your life. And so the goal really is not that you're going out like door to door knocking and saying, do you know Jesus? That is not the goal. You could do that, but the goal is be already engaged the relationships you're in a really intentional way. We want to create these spaces where you can invite them into, where it feels safe to invite them into, because you're already thinking of a few of those people. You're like, they'd probably never come to church with me, and you're probably right. They wouldn't for a while, but you get them in these circles for a while, and then they trust you and say, well, you're not as weird as I thought you were, and your friends are all right too, so maybe I'll check this out. And this is also the beauty of a church plant, is if people have those preconceived notions about church, it's a lot easier to invite them into something brand new where they know a lot of that's not going to exist. Yeah. They get an active part into being a part of that growing process.
So in your heads, can you guys already start to pick out some of those groups that you're already a part of on the outside? Like, I know for me, in this next season, some teachers have convinced me to join an adult dance class, so if anybody else wants to join, let me know, because I'm kind of embarrassed. And actually, Sarah, you know some of them are at Woodland. They've convinced me, and I'm dreading it, but at the same time, that's what I'm going to be that one, I'm going to lean into. Like, that's already a decision in my head. I'm doing this because I need to lean in, not because I just want to dance. But those different pockets, I mean, it could be something as simple as, your friends that you go work out with at the Y. Or maybe it's a book club that you're a part of through, the community center. Or maybe it just can be whatever pocket. But if we focus in on those people and just start inviting them to things, like, it's not weird, it's not awkward, because you're just inviting them to come hang out. So that's how we get people into.
Right. So by doing this, you're overcoming a lot of that religious skepticism, because you're not inviting them into a religious event. It shouldn't smell like the church. It shouldn't feel like a church-driven agenda, right? It should just feel like an opportunity to get to know new people. And then you're overcoming that time thing, because hopefully it's something they would already put in their calendar. It's not an added ask. But then, once they get into here, then this middle space here is the church. And when I say the church, I mean maybe a worship service is a better way to put that. This is the people that regularly choose to worship with us. And so many of them are going to be the active Christian members of this church, right? And you still see there's a lot out here that are saying, and I don't know where they're at in the faith, but they're outside of the church, and we're still hoping and praying they're ready to come in, and we'll be ready for them when they come in. But because the goal of this worship service isn't to attract people from the curb, which often, like if you think about like the Willow Creek or the Saddleback model, it's doing a really, really, really good church service that is seeker sensitive. So basically meaning like a show for the unchurched, then they will come straight from out here to here. And we just know, especially in a community like Portage, where there's already a lot of great churches, the low-hanging fruit, right, is probably gone for the most part. Unless Jesus does something radically to move somebody to go to church, and it'll happen because we're in Southwest Michigan. Some will do that, right? But for the most part, we're anticipating most people are not going to come straight there, that they're going to have to come through these relationships, through these crowd gatherings. And because that's the case, because we're not saying this is largely for the unchurched, this can be and should be for the church. This is for people that come and want to worship Jesus. And so by doing that, obviously we want to be aware and expect that there would be new people there all the time and use common language and define what we're saying, tell why we're doing things so they don't think they need to know. One of Kenzie's first experiences with a traditional church, because she didn't grow up Christian, as she came in and they're doing weird things with their hands and saying weird things, she's like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? Why don't I know this? We don't want that to happen to people, right?
I still get anxiety walking into new churches because I'm like, what am I not going to know? Because
Right.
I'm not from like a church background.
Right.
And trust me, all churches do some weird things. So we want to make sure
So we
that
wanna
we're,
just make
we're
sure we
sensitive
explain
to
it.
that,
Right.
but not to the meat that's going
Right.
to be.
And so people have said, well, what will worship look like? I said, well, quite frankly, it probably won't look a lot different than what you may have experienced here at the Bridge if you have, or the other church. It's going to be a place where, first and foremost, you worship. And secondly, it's going to be a place where hopefully you are encouraged and receive the gospel of grace. And that's going to happen through great music, and that's going to happen through hopefully great preaching. And that's what we're going to do. And the reason I think this overcomes some of the religious skepticism is you guys all know that and I think the culture shifted a lot in the last 30 years from like the Willow Creek heydays, right? That if you try to make a service for people that don't go to church, they will sniff that out in a hot second, right? And be like, what are you doing? You know? And so what people actually need is to be able to sit back, take it at their own pace, and imagine themselves as a Christian if they were to become one, right? And so this was true in my own life. I had walked away from the church. I was in high school doing a lot of unchurched things, and this pastor started mentoring me, and I didn't know what he was doing, but he started mentoring me, taking me skiing and doing all these things, and he got me to go to a college ministry while I was in high school. And the first time we went, he introduced me and a couple of my friends, and they're all, hi, how's it going? And I'm like, especially the high school kid, you're like, wow, that's pretty cool, you know? And we went to the back, and they started music, and they're waving their arms and dancing and doing all this. I'm like, oh, I see what's happening here. You're just trying to trick me into loving Jesus and trying to convince me that church is fun, and I know better. Church is not fun, all right? I have a whole, 16, 17 years of experience to prove that that's not true. And after like the second, third, fourth time, I don't know exactly when it was, and they stopped noticing that I was there, and they're acting the same way. That's actually what helped me overcome that religious skepticism. So like, these people are sincere, and I think they're still weird, but I'm intrigued. I want to know why they're so compelled and so convinced that they would actually do this and like this and want this in their life. And then I can sit back and start imagining, what would my life look like if I was like them? And that's where I think the value of having a worship service that's first and foremost for worshipers to do that. So that's kind of...
Well, and I was just going to say, this is really where the idea of the long game comes in. Mm-hmm. Like, we completely and utterly believe in the fact that people are going to come in and need those deep relationships, and they're just going to need to watch and ask questions for a really long time, because we know that it's not our job to convince someone of something. That's the Holy Spirit moving in them. And so what we can do is make sure that they're included and that they're engaged in ways that are good and healthy for them. But we should never put on the expectation of them having to choose at a certain point, or having them to change what they're doing at a certain point, but instead walk alongside them and let Jesus, guide that. And so that's where coming in and watching and really being able to experience what these people are about, that's good and that's healthy. And so that pressure of having to make a choice, or that'll always be presented, that there's always a choice to be made, but it's not something that we're going to take away our friendship or our love, but instead press into a deeper friendship.
That what you just got as an aspect of what real inclusion is, right? If they ever sense that your friendship with them is on on the basis of whether they will believe what you believe or not, that's not real inclusion at all, right? That's
not
agenda.
real friendship.
And
Yeah.
so this will always have that sense of we want you, honestly, even if you never come in, I hope that's not the case, but if you never come in, you always are welcome in this space,
Yep.
right? And so lastly, this is kind of when you say, well, where does the transform part here? How do we do this? And obviously there'll be a piece of that happens in worship. But what we believe is the meat of this, where this happens, is these little dots. And these are small groups, but I'm a big fan of small groups. I've helped start small group ministries. I've led small group ministries. It's a really big deal to me, but these are very small groups. And why I say that is because, and maybe some of you have experienced this, we've had good small groups, don't get me wrong, we have. But what we found is in the 8 to 12 person small groups, real vulnerability, real discipleship doesn't happen very well, right? And there's a lot of reasons. Part of it is real vulnerability doesn't happen because it's an 8 to 12 person group. Who's going to open up about their porn addiction to a group of 8 to 12 people, right? I just, who's going to do it? Not many. How are people going to actually open up and be vulnerable and look for discipleship when you have an hour and a half and 12 people to talk? That's hard to do. And so what we're saying is this needs to happen, and probably and realistically in 2 to 4 person-sized groups. I love, and actually I should say, if you think about what were the most transformative relationships in your life, and I'll give you a second to think about it, or who that is. Or conversations. It's probably like a one-on-one or a one-on-two. And the only reason I put 4 is because I can envision 2 couples meeting regularly with intentionally engaging each other and challenging each other, encouraging each other in their faith walk. But that's what these will be. And the other reason I love that is because it actually takes some of that time pressure off. Because when we have a group that we have to get together that's 8 to 12 people once a week, again, we create time slot mentality. And even a great thing like an 8 to 12 person small group, because it really is a great thing, you build strong relationships in those, it all of a sudden subconsciously becomes this burden. Because you're like, oh, I have a small group this week. Oh man, I should like it. I mean, I have small group. You know, and you do this to yourself and you play the guilt games. But all of a sudden when it's a one-on-one or a one-on-two, in a lot of ways you can reclaim other time slots. When you have 8 to 12, for most people, it forces us into an evening or weekend time slot that's already busy. When it's a one-on-one or one-on-two, all of a sudden you have breakfasts and lunches back in play. Because it's a lot easier to get people together for that. And so you have this opportunity to kind of regain time a little bit. And not only that, I believe actually wholeheartedly that when it's a one-on-one, a one-on-two, a two-on-two, something like that, that you actually have the capacity to maybe meet up in 1, 2, maybe even 3 of these a week. Because it doesn't feel like this time slot. It's just like, oh no, I go get breakfast, with Dave, or I go get dinner, Kenzie and I go get dinner with Rick and Sarah once a week. We start framing it differently in our minds.
I mean, it could be as wild as, hey, this season, it's softball and baseball season. I don't know if you guys have experienced this. With our older kids, we're at the baseball fields, a couple nights a week with the same parents sitting in lawn chairs for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. It would be very easy to say, hey, on Wednesday nights while we're at the ballpark, we're going to make sure we're sitting and having intentional conversation around X with another couple. So it's thinking creatively of what are you already doing and how can you incorporate people in that. And you'll notice that some of these are split. And what that is a lot of times we found that there's moments where we know that someone's hungry for some type of transformation. Whether we think of it as spiritual or we think of it as that just I want to be a better version of myself. So we're going to have a very robust library that the launch team is going to help us develop that's going to include both like vetted Christian resources, but then also some secular ones. Because the reality is I could get together with 2 of my colleagues and do The Power of Habit, or Habits, I can't remember which, or Start With Why by Simon Sinek. So those may help develop those really intense relationships where maybe the next time around I say, hey guys, do you want to do this book instead? And it's a doorway into having some conversations. But the reality is, those types of materials, they're easy on-ramps for having those conversations.
So that's the big challenge of this, is saying, well, man, how are you going to keep track of that many groups, 2 to 4 people? I don't know. And that is the one way that we do that, obviously, is we start, and that's launch team, start with a really strong, good leadership, discipleship culture, right? But then the other way is to be able to give out a bunch of resources to say, these are ones we trust. We're not going to police you, but these are ones we trust a lot. And so they're going to be books, they're going to be audiobooks, they're going to be videos, because podcasts, different resources hit different people different ways, right? If you try to get my dad to go read a 300-page book, he would not join that group. I can tell you that right now. But if you give him an audiobook that he can listen to while he's driving, he'd probably do that. And so we want to give lots of opportunities for people to connect in different ways with different resources. And so realizing that a lot of people probably are not going to go straight from here to the crowd to here. Actually, they're going to want to move to one of these groups, especially if there's some real, maybe some intellectual hurdles that they're trying to overcome. Like this book here, this is talking all about the science and interaction of faith. And why I love this book in particular, it is a Christian book, but they don't actually draw any conclusions. They say, here are all the different ways that you can think about this, have fun. I actually love that approach because it creates a lot of conversation, and especially if there's an unchurched person and it smells too much like the church again, they're like, well, that's all fine and good, but let me check out my book, and that's good too. You should do that. But the idea is we're going to create a lot of these opportunities so that maybe they come through here, they get in that book study, doing a book like Origins, and hopefully we pray that they say, I want to cross that line of faith, I want to follow Jesus, and then they enter into that worship space with us. So this is really the ideal picture. I don't think it's the perfect picture. I don't think everybody's going to go this way, but what we envision is that most people that we connect with are going to start with the crowds. They're going to hang out in these appealing, meaningful communities where they can build relationships. Then hopefully they'll feel safe enough and welcome enough to go into a church or worship setting. Eventually they'll land into one of these huddle spaces where they're actually grown and challenged into becoming more like Christ, coming out the other end where they become a disciple, a pastor of others, to the point where they say, you know what, I'm ready to lead other people through the same process. And so we hope everybody will lead a huddle. And some people might want to lead a crowd. Some people will be actively involved in the church with worship or kids ministry, who knows what. But we hope that everybody grows in their faith to such a level that they're ready to lead others through that journey of faith as well. So that's kind of the big picture. And we have about 50 minutes. I'm trying to respect our time here. And so I want to just give you some time to maybe, we've been talking a lot and fast, to digest this a little bit and maybe ask us some questions as well.
So any thoughts about the model itself or any questions you might have, and then we'll move on to the last part and wrap it up.
In terms of what gets you excited, I think that in terms of the opposite of having a church that's really a show in that way, you're really creating a church that already has strong connections by the time people are in it. So I think that that's really phenomenal in terms of a model.
Yeah, that would
Instead of trying to create those connections once you have people in the door.
Right, right. Which generally doesn't happen very easily.
Right, yeah.
And it feels a little more artificial, I think, for someone coming in from that one, or at least that's what I've experienced, is it feels more artificial, so hopefully those are there before. That would be the hope.
Yeah.
And on that note, too, I think it's cool because we talked in the past about how you don't see Sunday morning worship as being the focus of this. But, you're clear to say that it's still going to be top-notch worship, right? Like, it's not going to be an afterthought, because I think that disservice later on if you do get somebody who is interested in coming in and they're like, oh, this is it. That's
true. So. Yeah, and we've already recruited a good chunk of the Bridges worship team already, so that helps.
Yeah, we want to make sure, it's not the primary focus, like that's not where all of our energy lives, is that Sunday or whatever day or night worship it is. but we want to make sure that there's no barriers, like that it's not up to par of what we would all expect it to be. So just making sure we're eliminating those barriers of someone not wanting to come back.
What have you seen from churches who've like done this model? I mean, first of all, are there churches that you're familiar with who've done this model? And then what happens as they do start to grow? You know, is this something that's sustainable with a 100-person church, with a 400-person church? Just curious.
Yeah, so I have not seen a lot of churches. I know of churches that live out a similar model. So in church language, they call these missional communities, right? I hate that language because, again, it sounds very agenda-driven, right? But that's kind of the idea. And there are churches who do it. And there are churches who have been successful in this. They will tell you that in America particularly, maybe not true in European context, but you still get a lot of people that'll go right there. So that Sunday morning is still really important. But especially in a community like this where we're saying a lot of people have pretty good access to good churches, we're saying we're really putting our chips in and going for the people that don't have it. And so in that way, it's a bit of an experiment. And I think as we grow, there are going to be a lot of questions we're going to have to flesh out, and we're going to have to figure out the logistics of it. Even thinking through, okay, Mitch, how do you make disciples who make disciples? So there's a book we're going to use as a launch team. And why I like it, not because it's the end-all be-all, because they give really good tools, reproducible tools. Because in my experience, my barrier to effectively helping another person grow in their faith is not my desire. It's not feeling confident in what content I'm giving them. And this really synthesizes content in a way that you're like, oh, I could be confident teaching that, because you can quite literally teach it on a napkin, which is cool. So we'll use that, and we're realizing that, okay, we as a launch team are going to do this, but then once all the launch teams start leading some of these huddles on their own, then what? Especially if you start dipping into some other books and people, we might actually have to improvise and create a few of these that are just for the purpose of going through this book again. Or we've had ones where we've seen a lot of transformation in kind of like recovery or support style groups, and you need somebody who's trained well to lead those effectively. Otherwise you can do more damage than good. And so we'd want specific people to grab onto those. So that's why we hold this structure as kind of an idealized version, realize we'll have to improvise as we go. But my big goal would be that we don't get super huge. This is all about church planning for me. 1 church, 2 churches, 3 churches. And honestly, in my goals, in year 2, we would be at 300 people sending out 100. That's my goal. Carter's going to be interning. He's a sophomore. I'm going into this as a church plant intern saying, get ready to plant when you graduate. We've got a couple moving from Montana. They're moving here to learn how to church plant so they can plant back in Montana in a rural community. We've got another couple, some of you may know, he's trained to be a pastor right now. We're building this hoping to send new people, start new churches for the reasons, and if you watch that Why Plant New Churches video that I explained. So to answer that question, I hope we don't get too big. I hope we're always at the size where we have enough resources and people to be able to launch new churches, but never beyond the size we can be to be effective in doing that, or even outliving our structure in terms of that logistic piece. So.
Okay, well go ahead.
I'll ask a question that I know
Yeah.
the answer to, but I'm sure a lot of other people
Yeah.
are thinking. Where's your church going to be, Mitch?
Yeah, so we don't have a church building, and we feel very certain that it's going to be in the southern reaches. We just don't know where exactly.
Yeah.
We actually turned down, I guess you could say, an opportunity in the northern parts of the city. And just because we feel really compelled, actually, that couple from Montana, I took a drive. Center, there's quite a few churches. Being turned south and center, go down Portage Road, go all the way to you. And I'm sure if you went through Vicksburg, there'd be a few more. But you go down or Portage over you, up Sprinkle, you'll only pass 3 churches. And while I believe they're doing God's work, they're not growing. They're not reaching new people. And so I want to be able to go down there because I think there is a void in churches actually going out actively reaching people. So we're looking kind of South Portage, down in those regions. There's kind of a triangle right there, right? South Portage, Vicksburg, Schoolcraft, somewhere in that zone. And so right now I'm in a conversation with some pastors to say, what would it look like if we used your space and we rented it? And the reason I'm excited about that is, one, we are already thinking about Sunday nights for a lot of reasons anyways, and most churches around here aren't using their building Sunday night. The other reason is, if I can help it at all, I really do not want people to give 4 or 5 hours of their valuable time, as we're talking about time is important, setting up and tearing down chairs if we don't have to. I'd rather have them out engaging people and doing real ministry. Because I think often the church has its most gifted, experienced, wise, loving mentors in the church and not out doing real ministry out in the community. So as much as possible, we want to try to avoid that. And so we're looking at a church space, at least in the interim, so they already have the kids' space set up. They already have chairs set up. They probably already have audio, video equipment, even if we have to supplement it a little bit. And hopefully then we're in there for a season. The launch team, if not sooner, we might be in there for a year. We might know by next October when we hope to launch. But if not sooner, in a year or so, we'll actually be able to have this the opportunity as a team to say where we're going to go and start asking for people to give us buildings or give us property or let us use their stuff for free. Or we'll together say this is where we think we should go and start saving our money to purchase that. So.
Okay. Well, why don't you wrap it up, and then we're still going to take questions at the end, and you guys can hang around and ask more, but tell them what's coming up.
So these are kind of the timelines here, and this is just to help your mind get around what the heck does the launch team do? Why do we need a launch team? The launch team is just what it sounds like. It helps get the church going. And so this is, again, an idealized view. We'll probably be doing a little of this all the time, but this helps your mind get around it. So the first phase is really getting around our purpose and our people, both the people we want to reach and our people as a community, getting to know each other, our gifts, talents, passions, and making sure we're all in the right places to do the most with what God's given us. So we'll do that for the first. These are all 4 or 5 week chunks. The next phase, we're going to be looking at kind of this building and grinding. What is actually starting to work out the details of the church? Important stuff like, what is our name going to be? Refining our vision statement, things like that. Phase 3, the stepping out phase. This is where we'll actually really start leaning in to some of that outreach kind of mentality, where we'll be working through some of the training materials that help us do that, but also stepping out in terms of doing big things like we're going to encourage each of you to raise support for this church as well. We'll be doing it, but to go invite some other friends onto the launch team and or to supporting this church financially. Phase 4 is really this phase we're going to be talking about a lot about leadership and obviously growing as leaders, but looking particularly what does it take for us to become leaders that create leaders. And phase 5, over the summer, we're going to be engaging people and community and organizations in the community to figure out who are we going to be working with, who are we going to be connecting with. Because one of my pet peeves that often big churches are guilty of is wanting to brand everything in their own with their own name. Yeah. And I mean, God bless them, they want to do work, but I would rather say, let's look at organizations that are already doing great things and figure out how we can partner with what they're already doing, not reinvent the wheel. So we'll be looking for those. And then in August and September, we'll start our pre-launch services, and the first week in October is when we hope to launch. So these are kind of things. There's some of these dates are old. This slideshow's been going for a bit, but gives you an idea of what we're doing this Friday. We're hanging out downtown. We have our first launch team meeting this upcoming Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. If you have kids, the great thing is we get to connect with Bridge Kids. So the first 45 minutes or so, we'll be doing things as kind of a bigger family with the kids. Then you'll check them into Bridge Kids, and then we'll kind of jump into building this church together for the next hour 15. We'll be doing that every Sunday moving forward. We probably will do some fun like field trip stuff, like go visit other churches and that sort of thing. February, we're going to start deciding what are we going to do. Who wants to invite people into things they're already doing? In fact, we just had another couple email us or text Kenzie the other night. Could we do a Super Bowl party at our place? I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. That's the kind of thing we want, right? Invite people into something you're already doing. Obviously, in the first month, 6 weeks, it's going to feel like a lot of us all together. As we grow, hopefully there'll be some more of these little crowds that form. But in the beginning, we'll all be hanging out a lot together. But what I want to remind you is this is a space where you should be inviting your friends into. And that whole deal, when you're young, when you're in high school and college, you have no problem asking your friends to come to a party where they don't know. Invite people into that. Let them know it's going to be fun. It's going to be safe. And so that's what's coming up. These are the ways you can that you can partner with us. And the first one is obviously joining this team. We really, really hope that many of you, if not most of you, say, yes, I want to be all in. I want to be a part of this. And being all in, being a part of this is obviously helping us build this church. But it's also saying, I'm going to commit this time, this season to building this church too. So there is, and Jeff would tell you the same thing, a stepping away if you're part of the bridge or if you're part of another church, a stepping away to say, I'm all in to this church plant, building this church for the next season in every way possible. Praying, so if you're saying, I'm not sure this is for us, we really, really need and want your prayers. And so I'm going to be regularly sending out a kind of an update letter asking for specific ways you can pray for our team. So please let us know. Partnering is this idea of, if you may not be a part of the team, but you have some gifts you want to offer for a season, I would love that. I had somebody say, hey, I build websites. If you want, I could do that for you free. I'm not coming to your church, but I'd love to build a website. So that's cool too. And then lastly, do you know somebody who may be interested in joining this launch team? Because again, the goal of this is to grow. We want this launch team to grow. Carter's going to get this squared away too. We're going to be recording every launch team gathering in the morning. So if people are saying, well, I missed a month of it, we're going to have a website set up where they can go, if they want to, go and catch up on everything we've talked about. They can kind of get to know the flavor and the DNA of this church plant, so they can kind of jump in running. So we'd love for you to keep inviting people into this community, into this launch team, all the way up through our first worship service and beyond. So that's the big way that you guys can partner with us. And like I said, we will stay here as long as you want. We're right at the 45. That's where we want to stop. So it's officially over. But please, we're here as long as you need us. We'd love to answer